sometimes the objective world and the narrative world touch. That's Jungian synchronicity. Yeah. And I've seen that many times in my own life. And so in some sense, I believe it's undeniable. We have a narrative sense of the world. For me, that's been the world of morality. That's the world that tells us how to act.
Jonathan Paterson, in an interview with Jonathan Pageau, raised one of the burning questions of an era shrouded in confusion and loss of truth. Will the narrative and the objective can actually touch? To develop the topic, I discussed it with Yonatan Mishal, a journalist and United Nations member. Let us take a look at what archetype narratives have dominated our lives lately. First was genderism and racism. We reached the peak of that narrative during World War II, the racism part of it, and now we are slowly reaching the peak of the narrative of the genderism. Mm-hmm. The second archetype narrative is the religious conclusion, the third temple or the apocalypse.
Yes.
Which most religions are kind of waiting for it. Even Hinduism, waiting for some type of conclusion, how we call it, of the objective and the narrative to touch together and something will happen here. The third archetype story, we are now going through the second to reach the peak of it. Perhaps by 2077. In the third archetype, so we just started it, is the supernatural.
I'm gonna contradict your structure that you suggested. Mm-hmm. I see it in a different way. From my perspective, these two narratives of the religious narrative and the supernatural narrative, they have always existed since the creation of conscience, mm-hmm. from humankind, from the caveman. And the reason I'm saying this is because throughout history, either documented history or prehistory, which you could still research, you could see evidence that humans believed in deities, they believed in aliens, they believed in all sorts of powers outside of themselves, mm-hmm. either religious or not, that are part of this world. They could be natural forces like animals and gods, and they could be unnatural forces like aliens coming and building the pyramids. These narratives have always been here for a very short time. For the past 200 years, or maybe a little bit more since the Age of Enlightenment and the creation of modernism, there has been an alternative narrative that is based on science and research, and that even has the need or the incentive to give agency to women or to men who are not already in power, to societies that are disempowered in general. Only modernism is the only time in human history, I could say 10,000 years or even more, that there was a chance for the disempowered to become empowered on a global scale, not locally. Locally, there were always chances for everyone.
Some narratives are already reaching the objective. Let us take a look at the powerful few. Is there equality in the access to information that people have in the world, so they can build for themselves their own narrative?
Absolutely not. Some people can only read a certain language. We're sitting here in Jerusalem, and the society around us, they have access to information in Hebrew. Mm-hmm. Some who speak Arabic can read Arab news, and if you learned English, sometimes you have access to information in other venues, but basically you will consume information in your native language. which leaves many people without any access to outside information to the language that they speak.
Ben-Zvi, the second president of Israel, claimed 60 years ago that the lost tribes of Israel are in Afghanistan. They call the Pashtunim. And they are in a valley called the Jewish Valley.
Yeah.
And 60 years later, this tribe, Reuven tribe, is what we call today Taliban. I read it in an Orthodox magazine. Do you think this narrative is part of a bigger picture that we can't see now?
Yes, it is absolutely part of a bigger picture. The reason you read it in an Orthodox magazine in Israel, which has no relation to the Taliban, they have not participated in preparing this article, right? They were not asked about the information in it. They were just brought as evidence that the claim for the land of Israel that belonged to the Israelites, which the Taliban were one of the tribes, apparently, according to this narrative, is old. It's an old claim, and here is another validation that this claim is valid. That's the purpose of this article, which has no other purpose, of course, in my opinion, more than propaganda.
So it's a conspiracy.
Absolutely, it's a conspiracy. It's not based on any evidence. And what I was beginning to say before is that Ben-Zvi is considered by...
Ben-Zvi, the president of Israel, the second president.
Yes, this individual, Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, he is considered by serious historians as... his research is ridiculed. He basically said that the people living in Palestine back at the time, before the creation of the State of Israel, are the descendants of the Israelites, which have forgotten their legacy.
The Palestinians are the descendants of the Israelites.
Yes. They're living in the same territory as the Israelites, the former Israelites lived. There is no physical evidence of the tribes of Israel rather than Judea. The tribes of Israel were never pushed out of this geographical land. Never. And there's no evidence of that. So theoretically speaking, these people may have stayed here. And according to Ben-Zvi, he wanted to prove they have transformed to become what is known today as the Palestinian people.
Meanwhile, in China, they already built future cities which are embedding all the fears that conspiracies are talking about, while in America, because people will be so against it, the cities are staying like they were built in the past.
Yeah.
How that gonna come to a conclusion, you know what I mean? Because eventually, a city that built for the future will be more efficient, more energy saving, more recycled, and better for the environment than to stay in fear and keep the cities as they are now.
Think about climate change. It is completely clear for most of the people in the world, of course, aside of a few who think otherwise, but there is a consensus between scientists and governments that global warming is happening, climate change is happening, and we are all facing destruction on a global level in the near future, in the next few decades. Nevertheless, very few governments are doing very little to counter this imminent threat. The reason is the same, because to change the actions of the people, you need to change the narrative. Today, the narrative is that we can go, you and me can go out here and eat whatever we want, order food, we can buy online, we could fly anywhere and travel, we could do pretty much anything we'd like without knowing what are the climate consequences that will happen from our actions.
Is this system can actually survive in the coming decades?
Take a look around you and you could clearly see it is not surviving.
Not surviving.
And it's in decline. Western culture is in decline because it has no way to change its course.
Which brings us back to the narrative. The Western culture
Yes.
is like a tree that's waiting for the fruit. What is this fruit? Waiting for the Messiah to come, or apocalypse.
Yes.
Literally, that is the narrative, while the Chinese culture, working a little bit different, doesn't have a narrative of a conclusion. There is not really a conclusion.
They're not waiting for the catastrophe.
They're not waiting for it, and they're not waiting for a Messiah to come
No.
or anything.
No, but you could see the connection because the Western culture is based on a narrative that is waiting for a Messiah. We're talking from the religious perspective, but this is in common.
Or apocalypse from the non-religious.
Yes. Think about popular culture. Think about all the movies. You know, there's this interesting. I have a colleague who he did research into film a few years ago, and he was talking about the fact that there are very few, if any, movies that deal with the future that do not end with a total catastrophe of humanity. He mentioned Back to the Future, which is one of the only optimistic futuristic films ever made in over 100 years of filmmaking and modern filmmaking. But most of the time, when you see a film about the future, it will be about the collapse of the human society. So this is Western culture. This is what it is expecting. And when you ask about the narrative, the entire Western society, and I would include Israel and all the people living in it, Eastern and Western, and Europe and the United States. I will also include the former Soviet Union area, Russia, and the former countries in that region. They are all looking forward to the apocalypse or to the end of days, to the coming of the Messiah. While in Asia, in China, in Asian cultures, Korea, Japan, you have a variety of different futures. Not just one, because to begin with, they don't just believe in one deity, in one God. They have many. You have gods everywhere for day-to-day actions and divine gods. So there are different options. This gives people, individuals, and societies more options to operate in the short term and, of course, in the long term.
The past 2 years, Pentagon talking about aliens. There is a big difference between a Truman Show than a religious show, right?
In a way, they have many similarities, and you could see that Truman Show also is based on a religious narrative. That, yes, that reality was created for the people, and all you have to do, your option is just to operate inside a setting that was created for you. Even in Judaism, you have this saying that everything was written beforehand, but you have the option to choose. You could see that if we have this comparison, which I'm beginning to like, in Asian cultures or in other cultures which are not Western, there are many options which also gives you the opportunity or gives you the option not to combine everything into one pot. In Western society, and when you think about these stories about aliens and alien bases and Area 51 and abductions, and now the Pentagon is admitting they have seen alien pilots or unidentified. In Western culture, you have to fit all these stories into one narrative. You have to stick them in there. They have to fit into physics. They need to fit into theology. They need to fit into everything, including popular culture. So who will be the director that directs the movie about these sightings? Because there will be a movie. We know that. So in other societies, in non-Western cultures, there is no problem with these narratives because you could have both. They could live simultaneously. You could have science and progress. You can have religion and faith. You can have aliens living just beside human beings, and there's no problem with any of that. They could all live in harmony because they're not contradicting each other. We have something to do. That's our narrative.
The difference between religion and supernatural is that there are two different axes. while religion is on the pyramid type of structure, the patriarchy.
Yeah.
The supernatural doesn't work like that. They're not landing in like all those movies to shake hands with the president of America.
Right.
It's not on the same axis of religion.
Right.
It works on a different axis.
It's a non-linear narrative.
Aliens, angels, ghosts,
Yeah.
the shamans, a complete, a profession that disappeared from the world. Now it's coming back. Healing methods coming back from the past.
Yeah.
Will that narrative, what's your take on the supernatural narrative? We just started that narrative. We're like literally now in 100 AD of that narrative.
Yeah.
Have you ever had experience from the fifth kind?
I think everyone has had an experience at some
Will
point.
you share it?
Yeah, I had as a young person, as a teenager, I think, I had conversations that I cannot explain with, I would say, with entities that were supporting me on my journey. If they were real or not, I don't care.
What they told you?
They gave me guidance. They gave me advice.
It was verbal or intentional, or you felt it's kind of type of telepathy?
Sometimes it was verbal. It came in dreams. It came in my mind, making conversations with these people. I remember I even gave them names at some point because they were really like, I had some, when I had issues as a teenager.
What's names you gave them?
It's too
You don't remember
embarrassing
the
to
name.
share. No, I remember. Yeah. But there is one story which I really
There was
like.
a Nathan L over there? Or?
No.
It was Shmuel?
No, it was these abstract names.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you still have connection with them?
No.
They disappeared? What age they disappeared?
Very close to the age that they were created. I imagine that by the age of 18.
Wow.
None of them
Until you
were
were
left.
18 years old, you had them coming and guiding you, and
Yeah.
you feel that these entities had like some type of high morals that we cannot even explain?
Yeah, what was interesting about them is that whenever I shared these experiences, then the people around me accepted them as completely normal because everyone had them. And it was very common, much more common than I expected it to be. So that was interesting for me. And yes, they did not just have higher morals, they were expected to have higher morals because if they wouldn't, I could not ask them for guidance. So they were a representation for me for what I would like to be, or the people I imagined, the entities that I imagined I could ask advice from, they were representations of that.
Have you been able to see them, or only hear them, or only sense them?
Only sense. It was more of a discussion
of a
with
sense.
myself. But there's one experience which I really like to share, which happened to me. It's completely real. And I don't know how to explain it, but I enjoyed it very much. When I moved to Tel Aviv in 2001, I believe, I moved into an apartment which was kind of weird. It was old and not in such good condition. And I moved into this really empty apartment along with two friends of mine. And the first evening we slept there, I slept on a mattress on the ground. And around 2 a.m., my cell phone, I had a very old cell phone, one of these Nokias, suddenly lights up, and I opened my eyes because the light was bright. And I look at the phone, nothing touched it, it just lighted up out of itself. And at the same moment, my closet, the door opened, wide open, and everything that was on top of the closet just fell on the ground. It didn't have to fall. It wasn't hanging over there. It just happened at the same time. And then I felt a hand brushing through my hair like this, like
Mm-hmm.
doing this move on my head, and like brushing my scalp. And I was sitting up, and I said, to whoever you are, I just moved here, and eventually I will move out. I'm not here to take your place. Everything is okay. I'm not here to intrude. And everything stopped. The feeling stopped. I felt relaxed, and everything was completely calm. The next morning, I woke up. I walked out of the building, and my next door neighbor, which was an old woman, she opened up the door. She saw me, and she said, "So you were visited by Berta?" And I said,
That's what she told you.
"That's what she told me. This is what happened." And I said, "Yes, did you know her?" So she said, "Yes, she visits here every once in a while, but don't be afraid, she's okay."
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was very happy that I didn't get into any conflict with Berta.
Wow.